on Jerusalem Dateline.
This week on Jerusalem Dateline, ISIS launches a huge attack on Egypt, knocking on Israel's door. Plus, a special look at prophecy fulfilled, how God is keeping his word to the Jewish people, from the miraculous birth of the Jewish state to its status today as a land flowing with milk and honey, how Jews from the four corners of the earth are making aliyah, and how Christians are helping fulfill biblical prophecy. Hello, and welcome to this special edition of Jerusalem Dateline on how God is keeping his promises to the Jewish people. I'm Julie Stahl, filling in for Chris Mitchell. Before we look at those promises, let's turn to Egypt. Israel has closed its border crossings with Egypt after battles between Islamic terrorists and the Egyptian military, and the Israeli Prime Minister is warning ISIS is knocking on the door of Israel's border. George Thomas has more.
Smoke hung over Egypt's northern Sinai after the Islamic State's affiliate here killed at least 70 Egyptian soldiers. In an online post, the terror group called the operation a blessed raid and accused Egyptian forces of being an apostate army. The Egyptian army countered with multiple airstrikes, claiming to have killed more than 100 militants. But a former Israeli ambassador to Egypt says the Egyptian military response showed a huge intelligence failure and a lack of military expertise.
I think now we understand the Egyptian army is incapable of fighting strongly against guerrilla tactics. They need some help, some assistance, and it can come only from the United States. And as we know, Obama has refused to do it.
Islamic terrorists have killed hundreds of security forces since the Egyptian army toppled Islamist President Mohamed Morsi in 2013.
Egypt is the anchor, the basis of the Middle East, and if Obama's administration doesn't understand it, we are in trouble. Egypt is in trouble, Israel is also in trouble, and Europe is in trouble.
Meanwhile, Israel is watching the developments closely. It shares a border in the Sinai Peninsula, and it has closed its two border crossings with Egypt. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned his countrymen that terrorism is knocking at our borders.
We see ISIS at the gates, across the border in the Golan, across the border in Egypt.
George Thomas, CBN News.
Thousands of years ago, the prophet Amos told of a time when the God of Israel would bring his people back to the land of Israel. He promised to plant them and never again scatter them. The whole world saw this miracle take place when Israel declared its independence in 1948. Chris Mitchell takes us to the heart of Tel Aviv, where it all started.
Here in Independence Hall on May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion declared the formation of the State of Israel. For the first time in nearly 2,000 years, the Jewish people were a nation once again.
This is where Israel was born. When people come here, they are astonished to see this place. Most of the people that visit here, their first reaction is, "This is it? That's all you have here?"
Ben-Gurion and his team looked for an inconspicuous place to declare statehood. At the time, Independence Hall, one of the first buildings in Tel Aviv, was an art gallery. During a 1978 renovation, the decision was made to take the building back to its original look at the time of the declaration.
Traveling in Israel will teach you that God has a tendency to perform his best miracles in the most humble places. This place is one of those places.
According to Isaac Dror, who heads education at the Hall, the establishment of Israel shook the world and became a haven for the Jewish people.
How many people prayed for it every day when the Jews said next year in Jerusalem and next year in Jerusalem? That's what they meant.
When Israel declared its independence, dancing filled the streets. But the celebration was short-lived. The very next day, armies of 5 Arab nations invaded the newborn state.
When it comes to the story of the War of Independence, we don't have many answers there. Very hard for us to explain. Call it a miracle, call it whatever you want, but we are here.
130,000 people visit this tiny hall each year to hear about the miracle of Israel, including tourists like this group from Massachusetts.
I didn't expect it to be so moving.
my whole life, Israel has always been here. So I think in some ways took it for granted. And now I, felt like I was here that day.
After 2,000 years of wandering and persecution, for Jews to have their own state really has to be a miracle.
Across the street is this monument with a scripture from Jeremiah. Again I will build you, and you shall be rebuilt, O Virgin of Israel. Surrounded by skyscrapers and a new generation visiting the hall, it's testament to God's faithfulness to His promise to build and rebuild the Jewish state and its people. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, at Independence Hall in Tel Aviv, Israel.
Decades before modern Israel was declared a nation, the great powers of the day gathered in San Remo, Italy, and signed a treaty establishing a Jewish homeland. Even today, it remains one of the most important documents for the entire Middle East.
It happened on April 25, 1920. Representatives of the great powers who triumphed in World War I met in the Italian town of San Remo to divide the Middle Eastern lands they conquered. France would oversee Syria, while Iraq and Palestine fell under Great Britain. The resolution also included the Balfour Declaration, written by England's Lord Balfour in 1917, which called for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. One English diplomat, Lord Curzon, called it Israel's Magna Carta. Thomas Sandel of the European Coalition of Israel helped organize the 90th anniversary of the signing of the San Remo Resolution.
Chaim Weizmann said at the time, you can say that Israeli state was born on the 25th of April 1920 in San Remo, because that was the significance of it.
Howard Grief, author of The Legal Foundation and Borders of Israel under International Law, says the resolution established several precedents.
The Arabs got the lion's share. I mean, they got Syria, which was subsequently divided into Syria and Lebanon. They got all of Mesopotamia and all of Arabia. And this is what Balfour himself said. He said, why are you complaining? You're getting all these lands, and we're granting a niche. He called it a niche to the Jewish people who were getting at Palestine.
But what about those contested Israeli settlements in the West Bank? Many people, including the current Secretary General of the UN, say they are illegal.
Settlements are covered in Article 6 of the Mandate for Palestine, again, the legal international document of the Mandate for Palestine, and clearly says that not only the Jews have the right to settlement, that the world has the obligation to help them.
This legal right of Jews to build in the West Bank or East Jerusalem is little understood in the world today. It's a situation that Thomas Sandel hopes to remedy.
We feel that we have a historical duty to just bring the facts on the table, because we are here dealing with historical facts. And this should be known, this should be taken into consideration in the public debate.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, San Remo, Italy.
3,000 years ago, King David purchased the land on which two consecutive Jewish temples were built, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And although God said his house would be a house of prayer for all nations, not everyone can pray there. Let's take a look at the controversy that won't go away.
Muslims call it Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary in Arabic. Al-Aqsa, which includes the mosque and the entire compound, is the third holiest site in Islam. Muslims claim only they are allowed to pray there.
Muslims have to pray, but others, Christians and Jews, they can visit, just visit. No, not to make pray inside.
For Jews, the Temple Mount is the most sacred place. Two Jewish temples stood here during Bible times. Jesus visited, preached, and worshipped at the second temple, yet Muslims deny it ever existed.
Archaeology backs up the Bible, which says it's our holiest place. It's the center. From the beginning of the Jewish people, many think from the beginning of the world, it's the center.
For years, rabbis said it was forbidden for Jews to even set foot there, let alone pray in the Temple Mount, because it was too holy. Now more and more religious and non-religious Jews want their rights to this most holy place. Linda Olmert is part of Haliba, the initiative for Jewish freedom on the Temple Mount.
Because we want freedom for everybody to pray on the Temple Mount. Isaiah says it will be a place for all nations.
Since the 1967 Six-Day War, Jordan has kept religious control over the Temple Mount. Israel maintains security, and only Muslims can pray there.
We believe that by committing ourselves to this status quo, we help keep the peace and security in Jerusalem.
But Olmert says it's all about civil rights.
The only place I know, certainly in Israel, where there is a real violation of civil rights as we have come to expect them in the Western world, in free democratic countries, is against Jews on the Temple Mount.
And she says there's plenty of room for everyone.
And I believe that when the Messiah comes, he'll solve all the problems. Should there be, until then, I believe that there's a place for all nations on the Temple Mount.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Coming up, the Bible calls Israel the land of milk and honey. We'll show you why that's literally true. Welcome back. The Bible calls Israel a land of milk and honey. Many people may be surprised to learn that's not just an expression. Here's what I discovered earlier on a trip to the Arava Desert. In the Bible, God promises the Jewish people a land flowing with milk and honey. And while it's a sign of abundance, it's also literal.
In fact, milk and honey is critical. It's used 20 times in Scripture.
But when the Jewish people returned from 2,000 years in exile, they found a barren desert land. And Orthodox Jewish author Moshe Kempinski says that was all in God's plan.
God says, I'm going to do something miraculous. I'm going to create a land that even though those climate issues don't call for it, it's going to be a land that's going to be filled also with dates and honey and also with milk, so that you know that nothing comes here. Nothing in this land comes here except when it's from me.
And God has delivered on that promise.
We consider leaders in that production of milk in the world.
Despite the heat, humidity, and limited resources, the Israeli cow produces more milk per year than cows in the U.S., European Union, and Australia.
We keep going up.
Ronen Gal manages operations for the dairy at Kibbutz Yotvata, the largest milking facility of its kind in the country.
The milk production in Israel is very clever. It's very high-tech.
And what about the honey? Most believe honey in Bible times probably came from date trees. Botanist Dr. Elaine Salaway emigrated from the U.S. and settled not far from Yotvata on Kibbutz Keturah in 1974.
Actually, I started out here as the head of the orchard branch. And of course, that was kind of funny because at that time we didn't have any orchards. So in the first few years, I was responsible for planting them. And the first orchard I planted was the date orchard, which you can see behind us, which is the main agricultural branch of the kibbutz.
There are tens of thousands of acres of date trees in Israel. Salaway planted some 3,000 of those trees here. This date orchard is here at Kibbutz Keturah in the Arava Desert. Each one of these trees produces about 350 pounds of dates a year. Salaway even managed to sprout a 2,000-year-old date seed found by archaeologists years ago at Masada. Nicknamed Methuselah, the tree is now 5 years old. Dates and palms were important in the scriptures, and dates from this area were known throughout the ancient world.
The Romans had nothing nice to say about the Jews, except that they had good dates. And their emperors actually used to order Judean dates to eat. And there were some very, very good date varieties in that day. They were famous through the known world.
Today, Israel's dates are still famous throughout the world. Israel exports some 12,000 tons of dates each year to 20 countries. Now, Salaway is going beyond dates to grow other life in the desert.
I'm looking for trees that love to live in the desert, that rejoice to live in the desert, not the ones I have to keep on life support.
She found clues in the Bible.
Well, the biblical trees, if they grew here in the old days, why shouldn't they grow here now? We reintroduced frankincense and myrrh, which had probably been introduced at the time of King Solomon. according to what we can tell from folk tales and from the Bible, there was already an incense and a medicinal tree being cultivated here called the balm of Gilead.
The frankincense and myrrh brought to Jesus were probably in crystal form like this. According to Kempinski, the revival of trees in the land is the first sign of redemption.
Ezekiel 36 says, "Mountains, shoot forth your branches, give forth your fruit, because my children are coming home." That's an unusual thing for God to tell a tree. That's what he created a tree to do. Except God is saying in Leviticus, I said it's going to be a desolate land when I kick you out. But watch, when I bring my people back home, this land is going to come forth with blossoms and trees and fruits.
So, he says, every date you eat and every glass of milk you drink here is like prophecy being fulfilled. Up next, God promised to gather the Jews from the four corners of the earth. Today, thousands are fulfilling that prophecy every year. In the book of Isaiah, God promises to bring back his children from the four corners of the earth. Members of one lost tribe have been coming home to Israel in waves over the past few years. Chris Mitchell was at Israel's Ben Gurion airport when more than 50 members of the B'nai Menashe tribe made history.
Their arrival was tearful and emotional.
I feel like I'm home.
I feel so excited. I feel so overwhelmed. I'm extremely unexplainable, like deep in my heart. I feel like crying.
And this group is just the first of a long-awaited migration. Nearly 2,000 tribe members live in Israel, but 5 years ago the government stopped their return. Now a recent decision permits all the B'nai Menashe, about 7,000, to return.
The 10 tribes may have been lost to us for many centuries, but they were never lost in terms of their identity.
Michael Freund of Shavei Israel worked for years to help bring about this moment. He believes the B'nai Menashe return fulfills biblical prophecy.
The prophet Isaiah says, Al tira ki idcha ani, fear not, for I am with you, God says. Mimizrach avi zarecha, from the east I will bring your descendants. Your descendants. These are the descendants of Israel, and they are coming back from the east. It is as if the headline of today was written by Isaiah the prophet 25 or 2,600 years ago.
The Assyrian Empire exiled the tribe of Menashe almost 3,000 years ago. Although they settled in northeast India, tribe members kept their Jewish roots for more than 2,000 years. Several Christian organizations helped bring them home.
And in fact, the Hebrew prophet said when God gathered his Jewish people back from all the ends of the earth in the last days, that there would be Gentiles helping and bringing them back. God said, I'll beckon to the Gentiles. And so we have this invitation from God himself to be involved in this aliyah.
Another nearly 300 are scheduled to arrive in January, with thousands more yet to come. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Ben Gurion Airport, Tel Aviv.
Coming up, see how Christians are helping fulfill Bible prophecy by helping Jewish farmers bring in the harvest. Finally today, hundreds of Christians travel to Israel each year to help farmers harvest their crops. This additional help is not only appreciated, it also fulfills Bible prophecy.
These Christians help bring in the grape harvest for Israeli farmers. They're part of a group called HaYovel. That's Hebrew for Jubilee.
We're a group of Christian volunteers from America and from Canada and from all over the world who have come to help the Jewish people, specifically in Samaria and Judea, usually referred to as the West Bank.
This vineyard is in Ophrah, not far from biblical Shiloh. More than 300 volunteers worked 30,000 man-hours to bring in nearly 400 tons of grapes across Judea and Samaria over the last 3 months.
You get to see the thankfulness on the owners' faces when you help them out.
Zach Waller directs HaYovel. His parents came up with the idea as a way to serve Israel about 9 years ago. They hoped actions would speak louder than words to help repair relations between Jews and Christians caused by 2,000 years of persecution.
Dad said, hey, this is an opportunity that we have
as believers in Yeshua, Messiah, that we can come in and serve and try to restore this relationship.
Then they discovered they were actually fulfilling Bible prophecy mentioned in Jeremiah 31:5, which says, "You shall yet plant vines on the mountains of Samaria," and Isaiah 61:5, which says, "The sons of foreigners shall be your plowmen and your vine dressers."
You will see nations coming to the land, working in the vines, helping the Jewish people. It says in the Bible, it's happening.
Local Jewish resident Aaron Lipkin sees the Christian love as a healing ointment.
Everything that is happening here is a big miracle. It's part of a process called redemption.
Team leader David Johnson oversees about 30 volunteers. This is the third season here for him and his wife.
We have a heart for the Jewish people settling the land of Israel, and it's a heart that we've been given by our Messiah, and we're here to help them.
I'm happy very much because when we walk, we sing, we see the man is very, very happy.
Rick Pauls feels so strongly about the work that he brought his wife and 5 children to pick grapes for a second year.
We feel very protected by God and by the Israeli securities. It's amazing to be here because as you read the scriptures here in this place, it just comes alive.
His wife Karen calls it an opportunity to give, but the biggest impact was just meeting the Jewish people.
Their faith is absolutely unbelievable. No one has been untouched by something pretty intense in their life. I mean, it's not for fame or glory. It's hard, and they just believe in the promises of God.
I mean, just being here is just blown me away, just being able to serve the Jewish people to enhance his kingdom here on earth.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Ofra, Samaria.
That's it for this week. We hope you've been inspired by seeing how God is fulfilling his ancient promises to the Jewish people, and how the one who keeps Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.